Well, good morning again, and welcome to One Heart, One Mind Center for Spiritual Living. And this is the fourth Sunday in May. And just in case you hadn't heard, today after the service, we're having our annual general meeting. So I hope that you plan to stay and see what's happening behind the scenes at our spiritual center, your spiritual center. And as I'm sure you know by now, this month's theme is Holy, Holy Uprising. And we continue with this theme this morning by focusing on the people that came before us and inspired and contributed to the New Thought movement, and by extension, the science of mind philosophy that we all teach and live and practice. And so I'd like to pay tribute to the people who brought us to this moment in time where we are now, so that we can personally continue to grow and expand and evolve as a movement for conscious transformation, which is what we are, for a transformation for our individual selves and for everyone, for the world. So this morning's talk is, as I've heard a few people say already, say their names, which is in reference to the people that came before us and paved the way for us. And in our turn, we will pave the way for the people that come after us. And as we look back over the course of human history, it's pretty easy to see the events that have occurred and what has been accomplished by individuals and cultures and nations, throughout all of human history. We can see, especially since everything started getting written down, we can see what happened before us. But it's difficult for us to actually put ourselves in the shoes of those people who came before us, because we didn't live in their time. It was a completely different time. It's difficult to put ourselves in the zeitgeist. I love that word. Zeitgeist means the spirit of the time, or the general trend of thought and feeling of a particular period of time. Zeitgeist, it's a great German word. When we look back at our history, the people, the events, it's easy to see how history unfolded, and it's really easy to comment and judge what happened from our current day zeitgeist, from our current cultural norms and ideas and our perspectives from 2021. But it's not always as easy to understand exactly why people did what they did without understanding the zeitgeist of their day. I know when I became a young adult, it was so easy for me to sit back and look at how my parents raised me and my 6 siblings and think of all the ways I would have done it differently. But, the norms of the world that I lived in, even in my 20s, were much different than the ones that my parents lived in, even in their early 20s when they became parents, and all of their experiences and cultural norms and the ideas of their days, and their personal history shaped their perspective and thereby their actions. And they certainly weren't the same as mine. And all those things play a part in how my parents raised us and how we show up in our world today. So I remember when I was taking a class when I was in ministerial school, it was on the New Testament. And I remember the professor told us that it was impossible for us to understand the Bible unless we could walk in the sandals of someone who lived 2,000 years ago, living in the same part of the world where Jesus lived, that we would never be able to really understand it unless we could see the world through the zeitgeist, the lens of that time, which makes total sense to me. And that's true for us today. I was thinking about it. I know my daughter, who is now 42, she reaps the benefits of the women's liberation movement from the 60s and 70s that I lived through. And all women living in the United States today enjoy the benefits and the efforts of the suffragettes who won the right for women to vote with the passage of the 19th Amendment. When was it? It was back in 1920. And because that was so many years before I was born, to some degree, I kind of take that for granted. And unless I take the time to understand what they had to go through, and it was a lot, And the zeitgeist of that time, the spirit of that time, I will never fully understand the advantages that I have because of their efforts. And in my humble opinion, I think this is important for us today because human experience doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's a collective experience. You know, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And while the events are important, it's the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist, in which we can truly be inspired to continue the journey of the growth and the expansion of human consciousness. That's the richness, you know, the interesting stuff of humanity. And I think the story of the development of religious traditions and religious thought helps us to understand that story of the expansion of human consciousness and inspires us to contribute our part to the story, to continue to be curious and explore and experiment and live and teach this philosophy which we study and live in all the time. And I believe it's important for us to honor and to recognize the contribution of those who have come before us, you know, to honor their contributions to the collective growth of humanity and to recognize the ongoing journey. And the exciting part of that is that our contributions matter. They matter a lot. And we get to be a part of this expansion of the good of the human experience by extension when we honor and recognize and continue and are inspired by the people that have come before us. So, and that's what we're talking about today. We say their names. And the first name that I want to say is Ernest Holmes, our founder. He invited us to be open at the top. You know, he was invited when he said that, he was inviting us to reflect on the past with an eye for what is yet to be discovered and experiences, and what we contribute, you know, because that is in an ongoing important part of the story. He knew that if we were a closed philosophy, we might become too stagnant and rigid, and we wouldn't welcome that natural expansion and growth that is inherent in life that we teach in this wonderful philosophy. It's inherent in the nature of the human journey itself. You know, we always want to keep moving and expanding and growing. And he knew that rigidity leads to that dogmatic, closed-minded state that is not receptive to the influx of new life. Being open at the top embraces our potential as these divine beings living a human life. So to say their names means to honor and recognize those who came before. You know, I know a lot of times on Mother's Day or Father's Day, I invite us to all say the names of our parents out loud as a way of honoring their lives and their contributions to our lives. And I know that on 9/11, it's become the tradition to read off the names of all of those who were lost in that event. And it's just a way of honoring them and to not forget the lessons of that day and of what they brought, you know, because we're not frozen in time. We use the wisdom of those who have come before us as this launching pad to continue this really miraculous journey of humanity. I mean, it really is a miraculous journey. We honor those who come before us as kind of a promise to continue the journey and to have the courage to move into what is possible, what is yet to be. And in keeping with that idea, I thought today we could take a look at what influences, what names are prominent in the New Thought tradition. So we started off with Ernest Holmes. I say his name with gratitude and honor and respect. And Ernest Holmes, he synthesized the science of mind philosophy from many different influences, from many different people. And so I'd like to just kind of briefly go over who those people are and what those traditions were that he synthesized this philosophy, the science of mind philosophy for us. So the science of mind is a metaphysical philosophy that comes under the umbrella of New Thought, and I'm sure that most of you know that. And regardless of the name, New Thought, the basic principles of New Thought are anything but new. Their roots can be traced back to ancient spiritual traditions. But the name more likely comes from one of the most fundamental ideas of New Thought, which is that a new thought in conscious mind is the seed that creates a new experience in our lives. You know, I think it's fair to say that most, if not all, of the pioneers of New Thought, of the New Thought movement itself, were raised in the Christian tradition. So the principles of New Thought definitely have a Christian foundation. And also, I think it's important to note that the New Thought movement itself came in on the heels of the Transcendentalist movement. You know, and I think that's an important piece of information because it gives us a peek into the zeitgeist or the spirit of the time, the spirit of that particular period of time. The Transcendentalist movement came in around the 1820s, 1830s, and had a lot of prominent people in them, names we still say, like Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau, and there were women too, Margaret Fuller, Elizabeth Peabody. These are names that we can speak. And this was a really transformational time, you know, the idea of the divine not being separate and out there somewhat, but being a part of creation and celebrating that creation. That was a part of the Transcendentalist philosophy, and that was new for the time. You know, the Transcendentalists taught that humans are inherently good, but can be corrupted by society or institutions, and that personal insight, our personal experience was important, that spirituality came from the self, not just from organized religions, and that we have to, all that we have to do is to look around at the natural world to see the inherent beauty and the example of divinity immersed in everything around us. And this was the flavor of the time, a very kind of independent look at life, you know, the basic tone and the tenor of the zeitgeist, which gave birth to the New Thought movement. I mean, really, when you think about the richness of the Transcendentalist movement opened the door for the idea of the New Thought movement. And I think we've really expanded on that idea over the decades. Think of how many people today think of themselves as spiritual, yet not religious. I know that I've used that description of myself as well. It's that same flavor that we're not stuck in this religious dogma, but that God is everywhere within its creation. So the next name that I'd like to say is Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. Park, as his friends called him. Quimby, who lived in the early 1800s, believed that he had rediscovered the lost healing methods of Jesus. And, you know, indeed, I think he did. And the loosely kind of organized movement that began around him became known as New Thought and gave rise to several independent organizations, many that we know. Unity Religious Science, which used to be what we called Centers for Spiritual Living, that's us, Divine Science, and there are many others. And there's a passage in the Bible, in Romans 12:2. And let me see if I can find it here. I want to get it right. And I kind of think that this is a really good expression of the foundational principle of New Thought. And it says, be ye transformed by the renewing of the mind. Be ye transformed by the renewing of mind. That's kind of the linchpin of the New Thought movement. It is through the law of mind that we transform our lives. You know, what we know that as practitioners of New Thought, we know that what we think and feel in repetitive patterns is what we create through the law of mind. And There are many, many, many pioneers of New Thought, and all of their stories are pretty fascinating. You know, if you've ever taken a roots class or read a book about the origins of the New Thought movement, there's a great book called Rebellion of Spirits, or I think that's it. I haven't read it in a while, but it gives you a full kind of overall view of the people that were involved in this wonderful New Thought movement. And Ernest Holmes, as part of the movement, founded the religious science tradition, which is now called Centers for Spiritual Living, as I said a minute ago, and we teach the philosophy of the science of mind. And like I said, Holmes synthesized his philosophy from a number of sources from both Eastern and Western spiritual traditions. You can definitely feel the sense of the Eastern traditions within our science of mind principles. Holmes believed that it was the marriage of science and religion that would lead us into a new understanding of kind of the nature of life, the nature of the divine. He believed that the ultimate goal of both religion and science was to understand the relationship between the creator and the created. And as a matter of fact, the first line of the Science of Mind text is, let me see if I can find that one so I can say it correctly. We all look forward to the day when science and religion shall walk hand in hand through the visible to the invisible. You know, and that's the meaning of metaphysics itself. It's the exploration of the connection between the visible and the invisible worlds through the creator into creation. So Quimby, the Transcendentalists, Eastern and Western religious tradition, all played a part in shaping the science of mind philosophy. But there were three major influences, three people whose names I'm going to say, that really influenced Ernest Holmes as he was putting this philosophy together. And they are Thomas Troward, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Emma Curtis Hopkins. These were the three main influences on Holmes. And, you know, and by extension, I teach and live my life by them today. Their lives have touched mine and all of ours. Their contributions still serve and inspire us today. And we're the ones who we have the opportunity to continue the expansion of this movement. So when we understand where these people were coming from and what the spirit of their time was and what inspired them, it helps us to continue to expand in this same vein of spiritual exploration and a movement towards good in the world. And so I think it's important for us to understand where they were coming from. I'm not going to talk a lot about each of these people, but I just want to kind of give a feel of how they played a part in creating the science of mind philosophy. Thomas Troward, we say his name, we speak his name, he was a British divisional judge who lived in northern India in 1869 to 1896. And he was devoted to metaphysics and esoteric studies. It was a great passion of his. And Troward taught and wrote about mental science. Let's see, I have a quote. Let me see if I can find it, page 6. I have a quote from him. Here it is. From his teaching on the creative power of thought. Thought, or purely mental action, is the only possible source from which the existing creation could ever have come into manifestation at all. So thought, or purely mental action, is the only possible source from which the existing creation could have ever come into manifestation at all. Troward taught that it was thought that inspired and created everything that we see in the natural world. Does that sound familiar at all? This is the juicy stuff that Holmes used to form his idea of the power of creative law. You know, just stop and reflect for a minute how this has impacted your life. How I use the creative law, the creative process in my life every day. And if you're anything like me, you experiment with creative law every day, all the time, through affirmations, through prayer, through being aware of what we're thinking and feeling all the time, because we know that that is what is creating our experience. We are living the legacy of Thomas Troward. That is really, that is how the people that have come before us, how their legacy lives on through us and how we expand on it. So, Thomas Troward, we say your name here in honor and respect and celebration, and we thank you for your contributions. So the next name I'm going to say is Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a major contributor to the Transcendentalist movement. And he dug deeply into the idea of the creator in and through all creation, of oneness. I remember reading that Holmes once said that reading Emerson was like drinking water for him. He just sucked up like a sponge the teachings of Emerson's, you know, and in Holmes' teaching, you can hear the voice of Emerson's passion for the divine in and through and all life. And Holmes was so taken with Emerson that he actually wrote a book called The Philosophy of Emerson. Where he does this wonderful thing. I was just looking at the book yesterday. So he does this wonderful thing where he takes some of Emerson's quotes and he responds to them. It's sort of like he's having a conversation with Emerson in the book. And I have a quote. I'm not going to share it on the screen. I'm just going to read it for you. Here's one of his responses to what Emerson said. Holmes wrote this. He said, "The mind that stimulated the act of antiquity," so what came before, "is the same mind that is stimulating our present acts." So he's talking about mind as this infinite continuum, which is why we're celebrating the legacy of the people that came before us. And he goes on, "It emerges through all. It embraces all ages, encompasses all periods, is present at all times." And here's my favorite part. He writes, "Uncreated, it creates. Unformed, it gives form. Unborn, it gives birth. Each hour of our day is an hour of its day." So you hear the oneness in that and the unity of the creator with its creative. And that was the juiciness that Holmes took from Emerson's teaching. And Emerson was enthralled with this oneness of God in and through all of its creation. And so was Holmes. And this continues to inspire us today. So I'm going to say, Ralph Waldo Emerson, we say your name here in honor and respect and celebration. Thank you for your contributions. And then the last name I'm going to say is Emma Curtis Hopkins. She deepened in Holmes a sense of the mystical. She's known as the teacher of teachers. Hopkins loved the mystery of the divine, and we can hear her voice throughout Holmes's writings. And when he was speaking, he waxed poetic at the mystery and the majesty of life. And I think a lot of that inspiration came from Emma Curtis Hopkins. And Hopkins taught about conviction. If you read her books, you can hear that she knew that it was the conviction of our beliefs, as she put it. What did she say? She said, as leaven in the midst of flour and water. So conviction is like the leaven in the midst of flour and water that makes our beliefs rise into action. And she gave Holmes the idea of the fire and the conviction in mind and in heart as we plant our seed of thought into creative law. Oh, and I think I have a quote from her too. Oh yeah, here it is. I love this. She wrote, "We call metaphysics the science of strength." Do you love that? The science of strength. Because to know metaphysics is to be strong beyond any strength you have ever dreamed of. Oh, to be strong beyond any strength you have ever dreamed of. Because we have that knowing, that intuitive, mystical knowing at the sense of what is real, at the deep, convicted level of our connection with spirit. So, Emma Curtis Hopkins, we say your name here in honor and respect and celebration. Thank you for your contribution. Oh, all of these people that came before. So, we recognize and we celebrate all these teachers by teaching about them, by speaking their names into the room, and by continuing the exploration of the divine in our own individual lives. So here's my invitation to you this week. I invite you to think about the people that have come before you, those who have had a positive influence on your life, a dramatically positive influence, who inspire you, and ask yourself what qualities you admire in them. And I want you to look for those qualities within yourself, because if you admire them in someone else, you know that they are in the midst of you, or you wouldn't recognize them. You know, I know they're there. And to honor their lives by expanding that quality in your life. I'm inviting you to speak their names and to exemplify those qualities that you admire by nurturing them and cultivating them and bringing them forward into the expansion of your own life. You know, those people that we know their names very well, like some of the people I've spoken to today, and those that maybe only you know, but to know that we are all part of this one life, and we are the living continuum of the expansion of their consciousness, which is the consciousness of the one, the consciousness of spirit. So let's move into prayer. Let's move into some prayer. Taking a nice deep breath in. I invite you to go into that place, that strength that Emma Curtis Hopkins spoke of, the strength of the one that is within us, the oneness that Emerson brought forward, the connecting with that law that Troward taught us about. Be in that place of infinite connection, knowing that there is only one life and we are all in it. We are the living embodiment of this legacy of wisdom that has come before us, that we are all in this infinite moment. And so I speak my word for and about each and every person that is present here on this call, and each and every person that is not, that we are so blessed to be a part of this life, this infinite, expansive, good, wonderful, blessed, wise life. And I know that we are cracked open even a little farther and expanded a little wider, moving into the full flow and the allowance of all of this to come flooding through us into the good of our own lives and into the good of all lives, the good of all of humanity. And as we accept this, I am moved into a deeper state of gratitude, of thanksgiving for the allness and the richness of life itself, knowing that the momentum cannot stop and will never stop, for we are an ever expanding and expanding field of good in divine consciousness expressed in our human consciousness. For we are part of the whole and we are part of the one. And each of us has our own divine part to play in this magnificent whole. So for this, I just say thank you. I know it is so. And I release these words into the capable hands of that law of mind that Troward taught us about. And I just relax in that, knowing all is well and all is good.